Welcome to Dark News.
Dark News.
Dark News.
Oh, shit.
They'll never know what it means to have a private moment to themselves.
BBC posted their first article about Silk Road and Tor. Oh, I don't have to go to the street corner and get shot?
I think Bitcoin means 1,000 Silk Roads.
This is a show about cryptocurrencies,
anonymity,
and uncensorship.
And we are live here today. Dark News number 002. Today is April 10th, 2014, and I'll be going through the latest news for dark nets, underground markets, and an anonymous use of cryptocurrencies, and all the latest news in those areas. And we will wrap up with some questions from the audience. So if you do have some questions for me, please log into Google+, and you can follow the Google Plus link, and you can use the Q&A app on the right-hand side of the screen, and I will answer them at the end of the episode. So this is the third episode of this show, and I've been thinking about maybe changing the format around a little bit. So what I've been doing the last few episodes, and what I'm going to do today, is cover some news items and talk about the news items, and then at the end I'll do some Q&A. Now, the challenge of this format is that it's kind of difficult to keep switching between having the camera on me and providing the pictures and the screenshots to the audience live, and then making that jive with the way that I want it to look for the post-recorded episode. So I'm thinking about splitting up into two things. I'm thinking about doing a pre-recorded news segment and discussion segment, and then just doing the Q&A live. So I'd be curious to hear what people think about that idea. Be sure to, post a comment on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or wherever you can get at me. And as usual, when this is put up on YouTube, I'll have links to all those social media accounts in the description below. So first of all, I wanted to talk about a new altcoin that came onto my radar called FedoraCoin. And so FedoraCoin, I had just heard about it recently. And when I think about altcoins, I'm mainly focused on whether they can do something really different from what's already being done. And I'm in particular interested in altcoins that are focused on privacy aspects of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin has, limited facilities to provide privacy to users by default. And so there are some altcoins that are popping up that focus on this exclusively. Now, the cool thing about FedoraCoin is that it is one of these privacy-focused altcoins, and it has other focuses too, but this is one of the significant benefits of it. So when I learned about FedoraCoin, I looked it up on Google, and if we go to the FedoraCoin webpage, it says that it's secure, blah blah blah, instant, and I guess it's focused on tips. So the acronym that they use for abbreviating FedoraCoin is actually TIPS. If you look it up on any cryptocurrency exchange, that's what you'll see. Now, what caught my attention was it says anonymous. With its unique coin mixing feature, FedoraCoin allows users to send their coins totally anonymously, making your transactions untraceable. And in fact, they claim to be one of the first. They claim to be the first altcoin that is privacy-centric in this way. So what is the tips thing about? Well, FedoraCoin is based on the Tips Fedora meme. I just brought up this knowyourmeme.com page on Tips Fedora. It says, it is an online expression used in mocking response to a statement of opinion thought to be held by a young adult male who probably wears a fedora as a fashion accessory. And it's making fun of a few guys that had fedoras at first, and then it sort of spread as a meme. So when I saw that they were claiming to be the world's first built-in coin mixing altcoin, I said, well, what about Darkcoin? I've heard of Darkcoin before. And Darkcoin News tweeted at me, and they said, oh, they were first, but it's a pretty standard mixer that relies on trust and that there are fees, and they proclaimed that it can't compete with Darkcoin. So I thought that was very interesting, and I'm going to try to get someone from the FedoraCoin development team on the show to talk about the privacy aspects of their coin. And I'll be tracking it as well in our market discussion at the beginning of every episode in the future. So I just wanted to get that out of the way because I will be talking about FedoraCoin, which is abbreviated TIPS, in this market update. And I wanted to make sure that people had some idea of what it was before we jumped into the markets. So let's look at the chart that I've got going on here. All of these assets are denominated in dollars. So we're saying this is how much of this asset you can buy with exactly $1 US. And I got a good tip from Free Stater Tony Rosano to make sure that I include last week's prices, just so people have an easier time following which direction the markets are moving. So keep in mind, whenever these numbers are going up, that means that the assets are getting cheaper and losing value relative to the dollar. And whenever they go down, that means the dollar is losing value relative to the assets. So if you're not a fan of a dollar, you want to see a red instead of green on the right-hand side over here. So starting off with silver, last week silver was trading at 1.57 grams per dollar. That's down to 1.54 today, so that's about a 2% decrease. And silver has gained some value on the dollar. Overall, since I started tracking it for Dark News, it's the dollar has gained about 3.36% of value relative to silver. Gold is trading at 23.56 milligrams of gold per dollar. That's about a 3% drop in the value of the dollar since last week from 24.28. Bitcoins have been moving pretty steadily. So since last week, we have a 23% gain for the dollar relative to millibits. You can get 2.54 millibits per dollar, up from 2.06. And since I first started tracking it, millibits have actually lost 67% of their value relative to the dollar. And we'll talk about why that is in just a moment. Darkcoin is also has lost some ground relative to the dollar, even a bit more than Bitcoin. So you can buy 1.95 Darkcoins per dollar, up 33% since last week, and up 69% since I first started tracking it. And Darkcoin has also slipped in its market cap rankings in terms of cryptocurrencies. So at the top of that ranking is Bitcoin at number 1. Last week, Darkcoin was at 14, and it's dropped to around 20 right now. And that's about a 42% drop, I guess, if you wanted to look at it that way. Now let's look at FedoraCoin. So in order to keep the numbers same, because there's a lot of Fedora coins in circulation right now, or tips if you want to. I am counting this in terms of mega tips. So that's 1,000 times 1,000 times the number of tips that are out there. So so right now you can buy 1.27 mega tips per US dollar. And I just started tracking that. And right now, FedoraCoin is all the way down at number 66 in the cryptocurrency market cap rankings. And in terms of ammo prices right now, similar to where we were at last week, relatively speaking for ammo, this is going to go up and down a lot over the course of the weeks, but it should be relatively smooth over time. And so today you can get 8.47 rounds of 22 LR ammo for $1. And similarly, you can pick up 4.42 rounds of 9mm Luger ammo. And finally, the gold, silver, Bitcoin, and dark coin market has grown from $226.9 trillion last week to $233.7 trillion this week. So that's about a 3% gain since the last week. Obviously, that's primarily in terms of gold and silver. Still, Bitcoin and even less dark coin barely make a dent in that total market. So let's talk about why Bitcoin is changing so negatively in terms of price. So for a while now, it's been all about China. A lot of the upswing in Bitcoin price last year was due to China coming into the market, and a lot of the downswing this year has been around rumors of the Chinese bank interfering with Chinese Bitcoin exchanges. So this is from CoinDesk.com. It's talking about how Bitcoin over the last day or two crashed about 10%. And basically what's going on is that a number of exchanges in China have been saying they've been notified by the central bank that they can no longer accept bank deposits in the Chinese currency into their currency. So this would be like if you were using Coinbase and you could no longer convert your dollars into Bitcoins. So this is a translation from the BTC Trade website. It says, with a heavy heart, we make this announcement that BTC Trade just received a telephone call from our bank at the Tech City branch of China Agricultural Bank, Hangzhou, that if we do not stop using our bank account to conduct Bitcoin-related business by April 15th, this is the deadline that's been set, our account will be frozen. Therefore, we are forced to stop all renminbi deposits by April 15th midnight, although withdrawals will not be affected at present. So they're saying you still will be able to take your RMB out of the exchange. You'll still be able to convert between RMB and Bitcoin, I believe, but you won't be able to put additional amounts of RMB into your exchange account. So whatever dollars or renminbi are in there right now, that's what's going to be there until this ban is lifted. And BTC China said that they weren't going to change anything until they got some more official notice, and they hadn't received that yet. CoinDesk did make a point to say that a lot of these Chinese currencies are still taking a positive note out of this news. So, for example, BTC Trade said at the end of their statement, we've always set our sights on the global market since coming online. We already have registered companies in mainland China, Hong Kong, Japan, and the US. We're planning to commence USD services soon. Japanese service is already online and operational. And they're also planning to publicly reveal their cold wallet addresses and utilize 100% proof of reserves, cryptographic proof of reserves, in order to show that the platform is solvent and that everything's in cold storage and the user assets are safe. So that is good news. But this is what is majorly moving the Bitcoin price right now, is this news with China. And today it seems that Bitcoin the Bitstamp exchange has been trading just a little bit north and south of $400. There seems to be a little bit of resistance there. I wouldn't be surprised from my amateur perspective that there could be more downward movement, that resistance could be broken, but we'll just have to wait and see. There's certainly a lot of people that still absolutely understand that the fundamentals of Bitcoin have not changed. They see that adoption rate is continuing to grow, and so when they see these cheap coins available, they're going to scoop them up, and that's going to provide some degree of resistance for the price, downward resistance. So, and I believe I mentioned this earlier. So with FedoraCoin, they do have this privacy feature built into it. But I took a look at the source code, and I obviously got that tweet from the Darkcoin people. And what they have there is a trusted, centralized mixer, and that is a single point of failure. It's something that could be shut down relatively easily, I believe. So limited censorship that they're able to circumvent there. And I also went into the FedoraCoin chat room to talk with the devs a little bit. And what they said to me, they confirmed my understanding, which is that they're basically doing some off-chain accounting with that. In certain models of privacy that can be very effective, and others it can be very ineffective. So I'd love to have one of the developers on the show to talk a little bit more about their approach and if they have any plans for that in the future and so forth. So the next thing that I want to talk about today is the Heartbleed bug. So this is a new vulnerability that's been discovered in OpenSSL, and it's been all the rage the last few days. In fact, it is such a controversial or shocking bug that it has its own little logo here. I've never seen that before for a vulnerability. So this is at heartbleed.com, where some of the researchers that discovered this vulnerability are explaining exactly what the deal is with this vulnerability. It was independently discovered by two different research teams, one at a security company, and another one was discovered by a guy at the Google security team. So the Heartbleed bug. So this is a serious vulnerability in the popular OpenSSL cryptographic software library. So OpenSSL is a program that you can use to connect to servers via SSL, but it's also a software library that is very, very commonly used as a source code for a lot of different software projects. So it says this weakness allows stealing information that is protected under normal conditions by the SSL TLS encryption used to secure the internet. SSL and TLS provide communication security and privacy over the internet for applications such as web, email, instant messaging, and some virtual private networks, or VPNs. And they go on to explain that the bug allows anyone on the internet to read the memory of the systems protected by the vulnerable versions of the OpenSSL software. So this would potentially compromise some secret keys that are used by service providers to encrypt traffic, and it could give up things like names and passwords and so forth. So it allows attackers to eavesdrop on communications, to steal data from the services and from the users, and to impersonate services and users. So of course, since this software is so widely used by many different software packages, everyone is scrambling to update their OpenSSL version. Of course, it's been fixed by the OpenSSL team, and you hear a lot of people who overnight had to reboot their server and upgrade OpenSSL, and a lot of different software packages that also updated their versions to get the latest version of the software library included to fix the bug in their software. So this includes Bitcoin. So Bitcoin immediately came out with version 0.9.1. Recently 0.9 was released, and so the only thing going on in this update is that they patched OpenSSL software library to fix the bug. We also had this going on in Tor. And with Tor, it's particularly nuanced and tricky, so I thought it would be worth some time kind of going over the Tor blog posts where they're discussing this vulnerability. So the Tor team says that they are, this was posted by Arma, one of the people working on the Tor project, whose name you see quite a bit on the mailing list. And he points out that this affects versions 0.01 through 1.01F. And they have recently come up with a new version to patch this. So not all versions of OpenSSL are affected, and I'm not sure exactly when 1.01, sorry, came out originally, but it's been a while. So if you're using an older version of OpenSSL, you're safe. And of course, this affects way more than Tor. But there's lots of different kind of components of Tor, so that they kind of break it down for us. So for Tor clients, here's the deal. The browser part of the Tor browser shouldn't be affected. It uses a different library called libnss instead of OpenSSL. But the Tor client is affected by it. They could be possibly induced to send sensitive information, such as which sites you've been visiting in your current Tor session, and this could be induced by the entry guards. We talked a bit about entry guards last week on Dark News. So if you're using a Tor browser bundle, now known as Tor browser, they're going to have a new version out for that shortly. And if you're using your operating system's Tor package, you should definitely update your OpenSSL software and make sure that you manually restart Tor. With relays and bridges, they could be made to leak their medium-term onion keys, which are typically rotated once per week. Rotating mean that they just generate a new key for these medium-term keys about once per week. Or they could leak their long-term relay identity keys. So this is all stuff that would compromise the identity of the Tor relay and bridge operators. In the area of hidden services, we have some similar stuff. It shouldn't allow an attacker to identify the location of the hidden service, but if the attacker knows who the hidden service if an attacker knows the hidden service identity key, he can impersonate the hidden service. So it would be more something that can be used to attack people who are accessing the hidden services rather than people that are running them. And they talk a bit more about directory authorities, Tails, Orbot, etc. These are some other components in the Tor ecosystem. Notably, Tails is still on sort of an old version of Debian that doesn't use this more recent version of OpenSSL, so it should not be affected by the vulnerability. So let's talk a little bit about the implications of this vulnerability. A few years ago, I was pretty passionate about vulnerability research and hunting for these kind of bugs. And it's really interesting because the bugs, the significance of them is not necessarily directly tied to how badass of a vulnerability is, how complicated it was to discover the vulnerability and so forth. A lot of the attention is decided by how prevalent the software is that has the vulnerability. So if you have some very small, obscure piece of software, it generally won't, if someone finds a vulnerability in it, they probably won't get much attention, even if it was a very sophisticated type of attack on the software. Whereas sometimes you'll see relatively simple attacks on software, but they are in a piece of software that is used all over the world, and so it gets a lot of media attention. That's probably appropriate. So I haven't looked into the technical details of this memory disclosure vulnerability, but we can definitely say that a lot of the attention that it's been getting has been based on the prevalence of the software. And if you want to go after people's software, exploiting a core, very commonly used software library like OpenSSL is a very, very good way to do it. And of course, this would be a really popular target for spy agencies and hackers and so forth who want to get into encrypted data. They want to be able to surveil, they want to be able to capture data, they want to be able to steal passwords and all that good stuff. So this vulnerability has been present in Tor and Bitcoin and some other software for a while now. We don't really have any measurements yet, and we may never have these measurements about how long people may have been exploiting this vulnerability. It could be that the only two teams of people in the world that knew about it were the people that disclosed it to the OpenSSL team, and who were publicly cited for discovering the vulnerability. But it's also possible that many malicious actors who did not report the vulnerability also independently discovered it and have been exploiting it during its lifespan. So I think that it's an important thing to cover. For the average user, all they really need to take away from this is, I guess, two things. One, update your software. Check to make sure that your software, whether it is vulnerable, and update it if it is. And two, keep in mind that there can be these kind of fundamental vulnerabilities that go unexposed for a while. And during the period where you were using software, when it was vulnerable, it's possible that someone was compromising your security or privacy during that period. And so you do have to take that kind of stuff into account. If you did something that you needed to be secret, you may need to upgrade your software, then do something else to make sure that it is once secret again. Changing passwords, remixing cryptocurrencies, that kind of stuff. Now, the next story that I wanted to cover today is a very interesting story. So this is coming from the Press Freedom Foundation, and they were talking specifically about Tails Linux. I've talked about Tails Linux many times on the show now. I'm a big fan and user of Tails Linux, and this article is specifically about how journalists have been able to report on NSA whistleblowers while using Tails to keep their communication secure and private. So they interviewed solicited three journalists who have worked on the NSA spying scandal to ask them about their use of Tor. So we have from Laura Poitras. She says she's been reluctant to go into details about the different steps she takes to secure communications with Edward Snowden, and she didn't want those methods to be targeted, but she got sort of a green light from the Tails developers to say, it's okay for you to be open and clear about how you were using Tails. And so she wanted to say that it's been an essential tool for her in reporting the NSA story. It's an all-in-one secure digital communication system for email, for instant messaging, for web browsing, and for encrypted storage. And it's small enough that you can kind of get into it without spending a lot of time trying to figure it out and needing complicated hardware or anything like that. So she's very thankful to the Tails developers for building this tool. Glenn Greenwald himself says, Tails have been vital to my ability to work securely on the NSA story. The more I've come to learn about communication security, the more central Tails has become to my approach, end quote. And lastly, Barton Gellman says, privacy and encryption work is what he's been working on, but it's been too easy to make a mistake that exposes him. Tails puts the essential tools in one place with a design that makes it hard to screw them up. He says, I could not have talked to Edward Snowden without this kind of protection. I wish I'd had it years ago. And on the, if you scroll down a bit more in this article, they talk about exactly what Tails is. It's an operating system that can be started on almost any computer from a DVD or USB stick. And it talks about how all of the web traffic goes through the Tor anonymity network, so you don't have to do any configuration. Allows you to use GPG encryption for email and instant messaging and all that good stuff. And what Tails fundamentally does is it allows journalists to work on sensitive documents and edit audio and video and store all of their files on an encrypted format. Never touches your hard drive. It securely wipes everything after you shut it down. And ultimately, what this does is it helps journalists who are operating in environments or networks that may have been compromised by government or criminals. So it is a censorship circumvention tool that is very critical for journalists. So I think that Tails is just super important. It deserves all the attention that it's getting right now. Now, the bugaboo that I have with regards to Tails, and this is not really the fault of the Tails developers, is that I want it to be more compatible with Bitcoin. Just as Tails is a way for journalists to do lots of internet stuff in a secure and private fashion, I think that Bitcoin has an incredible capability to enable journalists, to allow them to send and receive funds in a much more anonymous or private fashion. And the problem with Tails and Bitcoin over the last few months is that the Bitcoin client developers have not been ensuring that their clients are compatible with Tails Linux. So for example, very recently, the Bitcoin developers came out with version 0.9 of their software, and it was no longer compatible with Tails. If you copied it over to Tails, or you downloaded it there and tried to run it, you'd get an error message. And so they're working on fixing this vulnerability, but it would be much nicer if the Bitcoin development team could ensure that this is part of their standard regression testing, making sure that their software works with Tails Linux before they push these updates out. So I'd strongly encourage them to do that. And if you share this viewpoint, please get in touch with the Bitcoin core developers, people like Gregory Maxwell, Peter Todd, and Gavin Andresen, and just let them know, like, hey, Tails is really important to me. I want to be able to use Bitcoin with Tails, and so please make sure that these versions that you're putting out are compatible with Tails Linux in addition to the other versions of Linux that you're testing. And if you're kind of a technically savvy person, you can help them do that as well. They do put out test versions of their software before they push them out to the public. And so you can help test that to make sure that they are compatible. And that's one way that you can volunteer to help ensure that this kind of stuff happens. Something that I may try to get in the future as well. So let's next talk about DarkSend and Darkcoin. We have some exciting updates in that area. So the main Darkcoin developer, Evan, posted a couple of days ago on the forums at darkcointalk.org, and he said they're up to DarkSend beta version 6. So DarkSend is his privacy feature in Darkcoin. It's the technology that he is using to allow people to use Darkcoin more anonymously or more privately. And he says he thinks that they're getting really close to a stable product right now. They've implemented a bunch of changes based on a conversation with one of the forum members named Anonymint, and it seems to be working quite smoothly. So they changed some stuff with regards to master node detection and elections, and users can now run the nodes with a completely fair chance of being picked in a tamper-proof way. Now, what he's talking about here is about the design of Mastercoin and how their mixing service. It's not a service really. How their built-in mixing works. It's a CoinJoin-based protocol where a bunch of Darkcoin users are collaborating to together sign transactions with equal values. So if you have 10 different people who provide one Darkcoin as an input to the transaction, and then you have 10 different outputs, it's very difficult to figure out whose original Darkcoin went to which output address. And they also try to improve on some of the previous efforts with Darkcoin or with CoinJoin as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. In order to do this, they need one of the participants to kind of help orchestrate it, and that's going to be known as the master node. And so when he's talking about elections and master node detection and so forth, he's talking about this process by which you decide which of the participants in the dark send is going to become the one that orchestrates it for all the other participants, basically. So, and then some other details about other stuff that he updated in dark send, fix some other minor bugs and whatnot. And next, he will be working on securing the masternode messages with signatures to make them tamper-proof, writing code to pay the masternodes, and forking the mainnet to begin payments. And by that, I think he means that basically, taking DarkSend out of beta and fully integrating it with the DarkCoin technology. And also, DarkCoin is having a logo contest right now. Here is the leading logo design that's had the most votes so far. I think it's pretty sharp looking, and I'm looking forward to DarkCoin reaching its next level of maturity in terms of its privacy technologies. Let's next talk about a competitor to DarkCoin, which is Dark Wallet. So this is a wallet or a Bitcoin client for the Bitcoin cryptocurrency. So this is not for DarkCoin. And we have some good news from the Dark Wallet, folks. For a while, we were a little bit concerned that it was going to turn out to be vaporware. In other words, that this was something that they were promising to do, that they had received crowdfunding for, but they weren't making any steady progress on. Turns out they are, though. They just posted to Reddit the other day. And here's what they had to say. So here's some stuff that they've got working right now. Robust BIP32 implementation. BIP32, I believe, is the Bitcoin improvement proposal for encrypting Bitcoin wallets with a password. They also have multi-sig address creation and importing of multi-sig addresses. Multi-sig is a way of it's short for multi-signature, and it's a way of taking, instead of there just being one person that has a private key that's needed to spend Bitcoins, you have more than one person with in a variety of places with different pieces of the key that needs to be used to spend Bitcoin. So it's sort of spreading out the responsibility and the control of a given Bitcoin address. They also have successfully implemented stealth addresses and a secure logical communication channel, which is how they are doing their coin join mixing. And the other cool thing about this is that the particular cryptographic primitive that they chose for their dark wallet, it's called Curve 25519, and it would support blind signatures. Now, this is something that I wrote about a while ago. It was published on the Let's Talk Bitcoin website, and it was also discussed in a little bit more detail by John Matanis for CoinDesk. And what I was talking about was taxonomy of different ways of mixing cryptocurrencies, and Bitcoins in particular. And one of the things I talked about, so the idea was at first you had these mixing services that would simply receive some coins, they would do some off-chain accounting, send back some different coins. And the issue with that is that whoever you sent the coins to, they could either steal the coins that you sent, or they could record this relationship between where they got the coins and where they sent them to. And if they record that, then it's pretty much useless. It hasn't done any mixing in terms of getting privacy for your Bitcoins. So the next generation of mixers is based on this idea of having peers get together to do this stuff. And they the way that this works, protocols like CoinJoin or CoinSwap, they allow you to no longer need to trust that your Bitcoins won't be stolen. It's just not possible to steal the Bitcoins through this protocol. And if you choose the right cryptographic primitives for how you approach something like CoinJoin, you can also make them blind, which means that whoever is sort of orchestrating this CoinJoin cannot actually record any information about where they're getting the coins from and where they're sending them to, because of some very complex and sophisticated cryptographic technology. So this is the best of both worlds, to have a mixer that is both blind and trustless, and this is going to be a capability of Dark Wallet, which is fantastic news. I think that the blind aspect of things has not nearly been covered enough to do it justice. Is extremely important. So just briefly, here's a little screenshot of their test version of Dark Wallet they've been working on. And you can see here, they've got some stuff here about multi-sig addresses. They've got some stuff on here, scanning a QR code, pasting. You can add in a stealth address and so forth. And so it looks quite promising. And the way that Dark Wallet is intended to work is, rather than it being like a C program that you run on your computer or your phone or whatever, it's going to be an extension for Google Chrome and for Mozilla Firefox. And so that will make it pretty easy for a lot of people to use as a browser plugin. And it would also, the idea is also that it would be quite easy to use with various websites as well when it's a browser plugin. So I am very excited to see this progress with DarkSend. I'm very excited to see this progress with Dark Wallet. This is really good news for people that care about financial privacy. I'm really excited to see the competition between these two projects. I think that in many ways they're in a similar position, using similar technologies to provide privacy. Now, there are some potential limitations with regards to CoinJoin, which is the protocol that both DarkSend and Dark Wallet are basing their mixing on. The issue with CoinJoin is basically this. If I want to have a bunch of people getting together and they're pooling the coins and as inputs and then outputs, this only works if they all are mixing the exact same amount of coins. So if you're mixing, a bunch of people mix exactly 1 Bitcoin, that's good. If they mix exactly 2 Bitcoins, that's good. If one of them is mixing 1 and another one's mixing 0.99 and another one's doing 0.998 and etc., this doesn't work nearly as well, and in some cases it's fairly useless. Right now I am doing research on a particular CoinJoin based mixer that I'm not prepared to name quite yet, but I have some concerns about the way that they have implemented their CoinJoin based protocol, and it may be giving users sort of a false sense of privacy. And so this basically comes down to volume. If you want to mix exactly 0.5 Bitcoins, then you need to somehow find a bunch of other people that are also willing to mix 0.5 Bitcoins at the exact same time. And the more people you can get, the better your anonymity is. And if you can't find anyone else, then you may have to wait a very long time, and it may become impractical if you have to wait a very long time for other people to join in on the CoinJoin. So this is one of the restrictions about the CoinJoin approach. And I suspect that we may need to look into other mixing technologies, other technologies for providing privacy in the future. CoinJoin is here right now because it's something we can do right now, but I think we're going to find that it has some significant limitations with regards to these volume requirements. Keep in mind, Bitcoin right now can only process, the entire network can only process something like 7 or 9 transactions per second. If Bitcoin wants to scale up to, eventually it's going to have to scale up in the future, but with only 7 to 9 transactions per second, it's kind of unlikely that you're going to be able to meet up with other users that are willing to mix the exact same amount of Bitcoin or Darkcoin as you want to do. Darkcoin does have some potential workarounds for this. I haven't looked into it deeply enough to give them a thumbs up or a thumbs down on exactly what they're doing, but they are trying to make do with this CoinJoin approach. So that is all the news that I have for today. If you have questions, please do type them into the Google Plus chat area, and I will answer your questions. First question, why do some versions of Tor browser, Tails, etc. come with JavaScript enabled by default? That's a very good question. So this is a balance question that has been plaguing various Tor developers for a long time. And it's a balance between security and usability. And there is very often in software a balance that needs to be struck between security and usability. It's much easier to make things secure if they're also difficult to use. And it's much easier to make things very easy to use if they have poor security. And so trying to get both done at the same time and find some happy middle between the two is what you try to do. So in the case of Tor browser or Tails, the browser that's in Tails and so forth, they both come with a plugin called NoScript, and NoScript disables scripting languages like JavaScript. The reason why they do this is because when you have them, all of these scripting languages can be used to help try to identify you uniquely on the internet. Something that I talked a bit about in my book is there's this great website on the EFF website, I believe, that is called Panopticon? There we go. And so you go there and it tells you how unique your browser fingerprint is when you visit the website. So when you're visiting any website, you're leaving some kind of fingerprint there. You're saying, hey, this is the browser version that I'm running. Here's the stuff that I allow you to run while I'm visiting your website, etc. And the more that you allow the website to do, the more information that it can gain about you. And it turns out that unless you go take some extra steps, the vast majority of people that visit websites can be uniquely identified by the website. And so even if they're hopping between IP addresses, if they're using VPN services and so forth, websites can still uniquely identify them on the internet and track them between these different IP addresses and so forth. So it's a real challenge to privacy. And now the issue with this is that these technologies that make you easy to identify on the internet also are very important for making a lot of websites run correctly. So you need HTML5 or Flash to watch YouTube videos. You need JavaScript on a lot of different websites in order for them to work. If you have these things disabled, you click on stuff and nothing happens. Sometimes you load a page and it doesn't load. There's all kinds of restrictions. And so the challenge for the Tor browser developers and the Tails developers is that if they disable all this stuff by default, then a lot of people that are new to this stuff, they will download the software, they'll try to go to a website that they enjoy, and they'll notice that it doesn't work. And they will be very confused about why it doesn't work. And at that point, they may go on the mailing list and ask the same question that's been asked a million times. They create a burden for the help desk people that are help people figure out what's gone wrong with their Tor related software, or they've even just never used Tor again because they're like, this shit doesn't work. I'm not going to use this anymore. This is crap. And so even though it would be much safer and more private to have this kind of stuff disabled by default, the result is that if they do, a lot of newcomers will just get confused and they'll be turned off. And of course, if people are just not using Tor browser or Tails because they find it confusing, then they ultimately have less privacy than if they were just using those with JavaScript enabled and so forth. So the balance that they try to strike between the two is that they'll leave a lot of stuff on by default and try to make it apparent how you can disable it. And it usually just requires 2 clicks. You click on the NoScript icon, and you go to disable scripts globally by default. And I really do recommend that unless you're an extreme newcomer, that this is the way that you use Tor browser and the Tails web browser called Iceweasel, is that as soon as you open these browsers up, you disable all scripts by default, and proceed from there. And you can enable scripts from there based on what you absolutely need, which websites you trust the most, and so forth. Now, one of the very tangible examples of why you want to disable this stuff by default, there was a hack a little while ago that was dubbed the Torsploit hack. Someone, allegedly the FBI, but we're not really sure exactly who did it. Could have been the NSA, could have been someone else. They hacked into a service called Freedom Hosting. It's this company that hosts a lot of Tor hidden services. Some of those hidden services were allegedly child pornography websites. Many of them were, perfectly legal or had nothing to do with child pornography. And the people that hacked Freedom Services, what they did was they left an exploit running on all of the websites hosted by Freedom Hosting. And the exploit used some JavaScript to get a foothold into people's machines and try to reveal some uniquely identifying information about their machines if they are using Tor. So they were gathering intel on a lot of Tor users this way. Now, allegedly, this was a targeted attack that was intended to persecute visitors to child pornography websites. But of course, it gathered intel on many, many other users of Tor and visitors of legitimate, hidden services that have nothing to do with that. And of course, I always think to myself too, like, well, what if someone is a journalist and they're trying to, look into one of these child pornography websites in order to help them get shut down or something along those lines, or get insight into the mind of someone that would visit one of these, sick websites to help them get some kind of mental health services or, something along those lines. I imagine that not everyone that visits those websites does it so that they can, use child pornography. And so it is kind of, to me, it would be really awful if you are a journalist or just someone that was, innocently curious, who visited one of these websites, was targeted by the FBI, and then, identified as some perp that was visiting the websites. That would be, incredibly embarrassing. Even if you prove that you were going to the website for completely innocent reasons, I think that would potentially, remain as kind of a stain on your record and the public view of your reputation and so forth. And so that is a concern that I have about these kind of FBI busts, or just the idea of trying to target people based on them visiting these websites, based on that sole fact. So this Torsploit attack was a really good example of why it's quite useful to disable scripting languages like JavaScript, and you do that with the NoScript plugin. And just another side note about the attack too, it was only effective against old versions of the Tor browser bundle, and so people that were using the latest versions apparently were not affected by that. We were able to determine this based on some people noticing that the attack was going on, capturing the JavaScript and sort of reverse engineering it later on. So that is why some versions of Tor browser and Tails do come with JavaScript enabled, is because they're concerned about trying to strike a balance between protecting the advanced users and not deterring the new users who will be confused when a bunch of stuff doesn't work when they first open a website. I've heard that exploits have previously targeted Tor users and compromised their machines. Is there a way that I can sandbox Tor to prevent this from happening? That's a really good question. So sandboxing, the idea of sandboxing is that there's some software you're going to run and you're concerned that something bad could happen with the software. It could get attacked by some malware or a hack or whatever in some fashion. And so you'd like to enclose that software in a way so that if someone does get access to the software, they have kind of a limited ability to get at other resources on your machine. And so with Tor, the idea is something like this Tor exploit attack. If you could somehow put Tor in some kind of enclosure or envelope that you could prevent it from compromising your privacy. So the software would only be able to attack Tor, but not necessarily get out to the rest of your operating system or other programs running in your operating system to figure out exactly who you are, or to install more malware on your machine or whatever. So there's all kinds of different sandboxing technologies out there. I remember a while ago I used to use one for Windows called Sandboxy, which was pretty good. There's lots of different things out there. There's also for Windows there's a kit made by Microsoft called the Exploit Prevention Kit or something like that, and this again is a way of it's software that runs other software in an enclosed fashion, and if it looks to the kit like some exploit is taking place, it will just shut it down, stop it, block it, maybe kill the application if necessary. Another very popular way to sandbox things is to run an operating system within an operating system. And you do this through what's called a virtual machine. A virtual machine is basically a way of running an operating system within an operating system. So you could have a Windows machine and have a bunch of virtual machines inside that are any other kind of operating system. You could be running Linux virtual machine. You could be running a Mac virtual machine. You could be running a Windows virtual machine inside of a Windows computer. And the relationship between those two is you have a host computer that's kind of like your actual operating system and a guest operating system that's being virtually executed. And since it's being virtually executed, the software can put restrictions on what that guest operating system is able to access. Stop it from accessing files on the hard drive. You can stop it from accessing the network, for example, if you wanted to look at some malware and you were afraid about it sort of phoning home. You can stop it from accessing different devices that are plugged into the computer, all kinds of stuff. My favorite tool for running virtual machines is VirtualBox. And I think the website for that might be virtualbox.org. If you just do a search for VirtualBox, you'll find it. It's completely free. It's come a long way in the last few years. Even though it's free, it's actually very stable and very useful and pretty feature rich. There's also other products out there that you can purchase that do virtual machines as well. And this would be one way of sandboxing Tor. So you could, for example, download the Tails Linux ISO file, and you could run it inside a virtual machine. I've certainly done that before. This is a very useful way of recording videos for Tails and taking screenshots and stuff like that. Now, one of the challenges for this is it gets away from the original intention of Tails. One of the purposes of Tails is we verify and know that the Tails image that we're booting into off of a USB stick or a DVD is good. It's a good set of files that hasn't been infected by malware or anything like that. And by booting into that, not touching the hard drive, not using any other software, we know that whatever we're doing is going to be, at least initially, not infected by any malware. That's not going to be doing anything malicious that we don't want it to do. If we're running it inside of a virtual machine, well, then the question is the host operating system secure? Do we know for a fact that the host operating system has not been infected and is not compromising our security in some way? And if the host is infected, then it's pretty much game over. At that point, Tails is not doing anything useful for you, because any key loggers or software that's sort of spying on you is going to still be able to see whatever is going on in the virtual machine. So virtual machines will not protect the guest from the host. It only works the other way around. So this is only really useful if you know for a fact that your host operating system is uninfected. I guess if you wanted to, you could do something like booting off of a USB drive into some flavor of Linux. Probably doesn't matter. It could be Ubuntu, it could be Tails, or it could be whatever. You could run a virtual machine inside of that and then have Tails running inside of that virtual machine. But that, I would imagine, would be quite slow, because running off of operating systems off of USB drives right now tends to be slow enough. And if you have it kind of like nested in these kind of like Russian doll fashion, then I think it's going to be pretty unusable on most computers. I haven't experimented with that. If you want to give it a try, be my guest, but that would be my thought on that. So I think that sandboxing Tor, somewhat limited options. If you're using Tor browser or the Tor browser bundle in an operating system, then sandboxing it certainly could be useful, and you would use something like Sandboxy to do that. Or the Microsoft exploit prevention kit. I think it's, what is it called? The exploit mitigation something tool. EMIT. Yeah. So EMIT, and I'll link to that in the description when this goes up on YouTube later. So I think that would be a useful thing to do, is to sandbox the Tor browser bundle inside some other software. But in terms of running Tails inside of a virtual machine, I think you might actually be inducing an additional risk to your privacy, rather than just running it off of Tails without any kind of virtual machine. So that would be my thought on that. So we have time for maybe one or two other questions. If you have any other questions, please post them in the Q&A section in Google+. I think you can get into Google+ by clicking, there's like a link in the bottom left hand side of the YouTube video if you're watching this on YouTube. So this is a good question. What's the deal with the lawyers of Ross Ulbricht and the guys charged with money laundering in Florida? So I don't know what to expect out of this as a result, but it is kind of interesting. I'm not a legal expert as well. I have a passing interest in law, but so ever since the IRS categorized Bitcoin as property, instead of a currency or money or whatever else, some of the people that have been charged with money laundering, their lawyers have been jumping on this categorization. And they're saying that, well, this sets a legal precedent that Bitcoin is not money. And therefore, if you are moving Bitcoins around, you can't commit money laundering. There's no category called property laundering. Actually, there's a category for that. It requires detergent and sometimes quarters, but it's not a crime as far as I know. So this is one of the approaches that has been taken by Ross Ulbricht's lawyer. Ross Ulbricht, of course, is the alleged Dread Pirate Roberts, administrator of the original Silk Road underground marketplace. And there were also these two other guys who were in Florida who were trading through localbitcoins.com, exchanging in person Bitcoins for cash. And they apparently did a couple deals with undercover cops who gave them, more than $10,000 in cash for Bitcoins. Maybe it was the other way around, I can't quite remember. And they also indicated to at least one of the guys that they were going to use the money that was exchanged to do something illegal. So when it comes to localbitcoins.com, a few things to keep in mind. You should probably keep your trades relatively low. I wouldn't recommend that anyone do a trade of $10,000 in Bitcoin through localbitcoins.com. I think that's inviting disaster. I'm sure that there are people who are doing much larger trades like that, cash for Bitcoins, but they're doing it through other trusted channels. meeting up in some dark room somewhere, as opposed to just, oh, hey, you're a stranger on localbitcoins.com and you want $10,000. Cool, let's do this. Another warning sign. You should tell the people that you do business with on localbitcoins.com, look, let's do this trade. When we meet up, I don't want to talk about anything else. We don't need to exchange our names, and I absolutely positively do not want to know what you're doing with the Bitcoins. It's none of my business. If you start talking about what you're going to do with Bitcoins, then I reserve the right to walk away from the transaction, especially if you say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and use this to buy some stolen credit cards off of the Silk Road after this. That's definitely a warning sign. And I would also say to people, like, look, if you're going to make a statement to me like that, I really do not have any other choice other than to report you to the cops. I'm just going to give them whatever information I have on you. And, or at least I'm going to approach them and say, like, look, this happened. And I'm going to answer their questions with my lawyer there. Because otherwise I'm putting myself in jeopardy. I am potentially, if you tell me that you're going to do something illegal before or after we do a local Bitcoins exchange, then I am potentially in legal jeopardy unless I bring this voluntarily to the local law enforcement. So I would just put that stipulation out there for people as well. So, for Ross and for the guys in Florida, I wish them all the best. I don't see that they did anything wrong whatsoever in terms of money laundering. And I don't have a lot of positive hope for their cases, but maybe they will surprise us all and they'll have their charges reduced or get out of the charges or something along those lines. I certainly hope that is the case. Okay, this is an interesting question. So in the United States, tax day is next week. Do I expect that people are going to be reporting their Bitcoin earnings in their taxes? I think if people do not report their earnings, it will primarily be that they're not quite aware of these capital gains rules, or that they may be kind of lazy or whatever. I don't think that people are doing it because they think that Bitcoin is anonymous and so that's going to protect them. I think that a lot of people have been disabused of that notion at this point. Certainly, I've done everything that I can to spread the word that unless people are really doing something extraordinary with their Bitcoins, they're still going to be pretty easy to trace in a lot of cases. Now, I do think that could change in the future. I think that eventually we will get to a point where the privacy technologies for some cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin or Darkcoin or Zero Cash or some other cryptocurrency that hasn't been proposed yet, I think that the protections will be so strong that people could reasonably not pay taxes on their cryptocurrency earnings and get away with it. That it would be very difficult for this to get pinned down on them. Now, obviously, if you're being targeted by the IRS and you're driving a Lamborghini and you don't have any reasonable story about how you managed to get a Lamborghini without paying any taxes, I don't think that's going to work out very well for you. But I do think that eventually, the inevitable conclusion of cryptocurrencies is that they do not jive in a friendly way with tax collectors. And so I think that will be very interesting. I would just caution people that I don't think we are there yet. Something I think about sometimes is, why hasn't Satoshi spent any Bitcoins? I can think of maybe 3 reasons. One is that he has some kind of altruism about his Bitcoins. Like, I was not in this for the money. I was in it for the technology, and I'm just never going to spend the Bitcoins that I have because I don't want people to think that it was about the money for me. Another reason could be maybe he lost the private keys, or he's dead, or whatever, right? Maybe he just doesn't have access to the Bitcoins. That's a possibility. It seems unlikely to me, but it's certainly a possibility. Another one could be that he's waiting, that he wants to be able to retain his anonymity or pseudonymity or whatever you want to call it. He wants to be able to keep a private life without, and being able to spend his Bitcoins without giving that up, without giving himself up. And I think there are some people out there that could really wish to do him harm because of what Bitcoin has done to their interests, or thieves that just, are attracted to his savings, that they want to steal it from him. And so perhaps he's just waiting for the right privacy technology to come along. I would say that the first generation of mixers that are just about doing off-chain accounting, where you have to trust them to do a bunch of stuff, that he probably wouldn't be satisfied using something like that. He may not even be satisfied with using a CoinJoin based mixing technology. Or maybe he's not satisfied with Tor. Maybe he's waiting for better privacy networks to come along too. There could be any number of things that he's waiting for before he would be willing to spend the money and still feel confident that he can retain his privacy, basically. And of course, he could also just be waiting for the price to go way, way up. Maybe he thinks that Bitcoin's going to go to $1 million per Bitcoin, and so he may as well become a trillionaire or whatever it is before he starts spending. So that's also possible, but related to this notion of waiting for the right privacy technology to come along. So if there are people out there that are hoping to not pay taxes on their cryptocurrencies, I would never recommend that anyone do that. I don't recommend that anyone breaks the law, because I know that there can be very severe consequences for doing that. And I try to stay in the best compliance with the law that I possibly can. Especially if you are someone that is well known in the Bitcoin community, or even just somewhat well known, like myself. I'm not famous, but well known enough and enough of a privacy advocate that I would not want to make myself a target for being made an example of. So if people want to do that, then if they want to throw caution to the wind, I would sort of recommend that they hold off on spending their coins. As long as you're holding on to the coins, there's no capital gains tax on that, and you don't have to pay the capital gains tax until you actually spend the coins. And if you're waiting to the point where the privacy technology is good enough to compete with the kind of actors that are out there, the kind of capabilities of someone like the NSA or organized crime or the IRS or whoever, then I think we still have a way to go before we have that kind of confidence in private use of cryptocurrencies. I do believe that will be it for today's episode. This has been Dark News number 002. And it's April 10th, 2014. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your fantastic questions. Please let me know about what you think about the show. You can post comments on YouTube. You can hit me up on Twitter or wherever else. And check out the links in the description. I'll have links to the news stories that I talked about. I'll have a link to my book about the anonymous use of Bitcoin, and tipping addresses, and my social media accounts and all that good stuff. So until next week, I'll see you next Tuesday.